Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to imagine something for a moment. It's 3:47 a.m. The world is quiet. The city lights flicker in the distance. The hum of the night is steady, and most people are deep in sleep. But somewhere, in a dimly lit room, surrounded by screens, sketches, and fragments of ideas, a message is being typed. It's not a message to the world. It's not even a message for publicity. It's a thought, half-formed and restless, escaping into the digital void before it fades. You've probably seen them, those late-night tweets, those fragments of genius or chaos that make headlines the next morning. But few ever ask why. Why at those hours? Why with that urgency? What really drives a mind to reach out in the middle of the night? To speak when no one's listening, to share when silence might seem safer. That, my friends, is what I want to explore tonight. Not the content of those messages, but the human circuitry behind them. The biology of brilliance, the psychology of sleeplessness, and the mystery of what happens when a mind refuses to turn off. Because behind every late-night message lies something deeper, not just insomnia or impulse, but a dialogue between consciousness and chaos. In neuroscience, we know that creativity rarely strikes in the light of day. The brain's default mode network, the system responsible for imagination, introspection, and abstract thought, becomes most active when we're not consciously focused, often late at night, when the noise of daily life fades. It's the same network that generates daydreams, that allows scientists, artists, and inventors to connect seemingly unrelated ideas. And in highly driven minds obsessed with progress, with disruption, with building the future, that network doesn't rest. So what happens when someone's life is built around solving impossible problems? When their neural circuits are constantly firing, seeking connections between Mars colonies, AI ethics, and battery physics, sleep becomes not a refuge but an interruption. The mind refuses to power down. Thoughts spill out in fragments, some lucid, some erratic, all charged with emotion. I've studied this pattern across countless innovators and high performers. It's not madness, it's momentum. Their thoughts behave like electric currents that don't know how to stop once the generator of the mind is active. In the quiet of night, there's no boardroom, no noise, no audience, only the raw dialogue between thought and self. And sometimes that dialogue escapes into the world in the form of a message, cryptic, humorous, profound, or misunderstood. You see, when you strip away the public image, what remains is a person caught between two worlds, the world of logic and the world of emotion. The late night hours amplify emotion. There's a physiological reason for this as the body's circadian rhythm dips, serotonin and cortisol fluctuate. We become more reflective, more sentimental, sometimes more reckless. The boundaries between the rational and the intuitive blur. It's the same reason people confess things in the dark that they'd never say at noon. Now imagine a mind operating at the intersection of technology and philosophy, sleep-deprived but electrified by purpose. Each message becomes less a statement and more an echo, a way to relieve the pressure of holding too many ideas at once, a form of release. Some psychologists call this cognitive overflow. It's the brain's equivalent of steam escaping from an engine that's been running too long. You either release it or it explodes. And this, I believe, is what those late-night messages represent. Not public announcements, but private vents made public. It's the cost of a brain running at full capacity. When I began studying high-performance cognition, I noticed something fascinating. The most creative people in history, from Nikola Tesla to Marie Curie, from Leonardo da Vinci to Ada Lovelace, all shared this pattern of nocturnal activity. Tesla famously claimed he slept only 2 hours a night. Da Vinci practiced polyphasic sleep, waking every few hours to write and sketch. They weren't driven by insomnia, they were haunted by vision. There's a phenomenon in neuroscience called liminal thinking, the state between wakefulness and sleep, where the brain transitions from beta to alpha and theta waves. It's in this twilight zone that the mind becomes more associative, less censored. Ideas that normally wouldn't connect suddenly fuse. It's where innovation lives. Now imagine existing in that liminal zone not for minutes, but for years, constantly hovering between clarity and chaos, logic and imagination. That's not just creativity, it's neurological endurance. It's what happens when someone lives at the frontier of human thought. So when the world sees a late night post and says, "That's impulsive," or "That's strange," I see a different story. I see a cognitive release from a mind stretched to its evolutionary limit. But there's something else here, something more human. Behind every screen, behind every message, there's a pulse. The need to be understood, the desire for connection. When you operate at a scale where few can relate to your thoughts, the digital realm becomes a form of companionship. You send messages not because you want attention, but because you crave resonance, a signal in the static. It's easy to assume that someone surrounded by millions must feel connected. But the truth, as countless studies show, is the opposite. The higher you climb in status, the smaller your circle of emotional safety becomes. Fame isolates. Genius isolates. And in that isolation, even a small moment of online expression can feel like a heartbeat in the dark. We've seen this pattern across countless public figures, scientists, artists, even philosophers. In moments of deep reflection, they reach out to the void, not to speak to people, but to remind themselves that they're still part of humanity. That despite their extraordinary pace, they still feel, still question, still dream. And that's the paradox of progress. The more you push the boundaries of what's possible, the further you drift from the familiar rhythms of life. I remember once studying the brain scans of individuals in states of deep creative flow. Their prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for self-criticism and social awareness, actually deactivates. In that state, people lose track of time, hunger, even identity. They merge with the act of creation. And when they come back, the transition can be disorienting. It's like waking from a lucid dream. The first instinct is to anchor yourself, to share a thought, a feeling, a word, to remind your consciousness that you exist. That's what those messages often are, anchors, little proofs of existence in the midst of mental storms. Now, this might sound poetic, but it's deeply biological. The human brain, when deprived of social mirroring, that is, feedback from others, begins to seek validation in whatever form it can find. That's not vanity, that's survival. Our neural reward circuits are wired to crave acknowledgement. In the absence of close relationships that can provide that feedback, a public platform becomes a surrogate. So when you see a post at 200 a.m., don't just read the words. Listen to the signal behind them. It's not always strategy. Sometimes it's humanity. In my research, I've found that the most profound messages often come not from calm reflection, but from moments of vulnerability. The night doesn't just invite creativity, it amplifies truth. When the world sleeps, we stop performing. We stop defending. We start feeling. And that's when the real story comes out. Because late night messages, whether written by a visionary, a scientist, or an ordinary soul, emerge from the same place, the silent intersection between thought and emotion. When you peel back the layers of intellect, achievement, and responsibility, you find the same human core pulsing underneath. We are all, at some hour, vulnerable to our own thoughts. We are all awake at times when the world expects us to rest, wrestling with ideas, regrets, hopes, or longing. The difference is simply scale. For most, a midnight reflection stays confined to a journal or a whisper. But for someone whose voice carries across millions, that same reflection becomes a broadcast, magnified, dissected, and misunderstood. I've often said that when you want to understand someone truly extraordinary, you must study not just their achievements, but their moments of restlessness. Because genius does not thrive in comfort. It grows in discomfort, in sleeplessness, in that perpetual hunger to turn questions into reality. The human brain is designed to seek equilibrium, to find rest, to conserve energy, but some minds are wired differently. They treat equilibrium as the enemy. The very same dopamine systems that motivate us toward goals can, in highly driven individuals, become overclocked. They no longer respond to normal rewards. They require the extraordinary to feel alive. For such a mind, silence can feel like suffocation. An expression, even chaotic expression, becomes oxygen. When I examine the data from people who live at this edge, I notice another striking pattern. Their REM sleep, the stage responsible for emotional regulation and memory consolidation, is often shortened or fragmented. In its place, they hover in light sleep stages, oscillating between rest and thought. This, in turn, allows the mind to remain partially active. It's almost as if their consciousness never fully signs off. That might sound like a gift, but it's also a cost. The boundary between imagination and exhaustion begins to blur. Emotions intensify. Impulses surface faster. You begin to see life through a lens of relentless urgency. And that's what those late night messages reflect, not chaos, but the consequence of caring too deeply. When your life's mission is to bend reality, to move civilization forward, you live in a constant tension between serenity and storm. In those hours when the world is asleep, the visionary often faces their truest opponent, their own mind. There's something poetic in that, isn't there? The very intellect that builds rockets and revolutionizes industries also becomes the source of its own unrest. It's a dance between brilliance and burnout, inspiration and isolation. But here's where neuroscience offers hope. The same neural pathways that drive this intensity, the dopaminergic circuits, the prefrontal striatal loops, can also be trained for balance. Mindfulness, deep breathing, even structured solitude can help redirect that energy. The key is not to suppress the late-night spark, but to channel it consciously. Because at its core, those messages are reminders of something profoundly human. The need to feel alive. The need to reach beyond the mechanical and touch the emotional. Even when surrounded by machines, data and logic, the human heart seeks warmth. It seeks meaning. And that's what many miss when they judge the erratic bursts of a creative mind. They see instability. I see honesty. You see, genius doesn't wear a polished mask. It doesn't operate on schedules or sleep cycles. It erupts, it questions, it doubts, it bleeds into the night. The late night hours are where the boundaries of self dissolve and new worlds are born. In ancient cultures, they called this the witching hour, a sacred time when the veil between worlds was thin. Today, we might say it's when the conscious and subconscious minds begin to merge. Ideas, fears, and visions intermingle freely. It's when some of humanity's greatest breakthroughs and breakdowns occur. I once spoke with a neuroscientist who worked with some of the top inventors in Silicon Valley. He told me something that stayed with me. They all crave silence, but they can't survive it. That paradox struck me deeply. The mind that changes the world often cannot find peace within it. And perhaps that's the real story behind those messages. They're not noise, they're signals. Small, flickering beacons sent into the digital night by a restless consciousness trying to make sense of its own magnitude. Imagine the weight of carrying a world inside your mind, of thinking not just about tomorrow, but about the next century. Imagine the loneliness of that perspective. When you live in the future, the present becomes a foreign country. So when a thought escapes at 200 a.m., it's not carelessness, it's compression. It's the mind trying to offload the unbearable weight of insight. I often remind my students that human cognition is not infinite. Our prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason and decision-making, can only hold about 7 pieces of information at a time. For most of us, that's enough to manage a grocery list or a conversation. But for someone juggling interplanetary logistics, AI ethics, neural engineering, and the existential fate of humanity, that threshold is constantly exceeded. Something must give. Sometimes what gives is sleep, sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's privacy. But every time a late night message is sent into the world, it tells us something about the sender, that they are still searching, still trying to bridge the impossible gap between intellect and intimacy, between building for billions and feeling understood by one. And that, I think, is the paradox of our age. We are more connected than ever, yet more emotionally fragmented than at any time in history. Technology amplifies thought but dilutes empathy. It allows us to speak instantly to millions but rarely to be heard by anyone. So maybe those late night moments are, at their core, acts of rebellion against that fragmentation. They are reminders that behind every algorithm, every empire, every invention, there still beats a fragile human heart. There's a certain humility in that, an unspoken admission that no amount of progress can erase our need for meaning. I remember reading an old note from a psychologist who studied high-achieving individuals. He wrote, "The strongest minds often express their vulnerability not through confession, but through creation." That line has stayed with me for years, because expression, whether through art, invention, or even a tweet, is how the human psyche maintains balance. It's how it prevents itself from collapsing under the gravity of its own intensity. So when the headlines mock a midnight thought as erratic, I see something else. I see a pulse. I see a mind refusing to go numb. And maybe that's what we should celebrate more often, not just the polished achievements, but the raw, unfiltered humanity behind them. Every late-night message is a breadcrumb in the labyrinth of consciousness. It tells us that even the brightest minds wander in the dark sometimes, that brilliance and confusion can coexist, that even the most advanced intellect still needs to whisper into the night. Is anyone out there who understands? Because that, ladies and gentlemen, is the essence of being human, the desire to be seen not just for what we do, but for what we feel. The real story behind those late night messages isn't about algorithms, markets, or PR. It's about a man awake at the edge of thought, trying to connect the vastness of his mind to the simplicity of human emotion. And perhaps if we listen closely, not to the noise, but to the silence between the words, we might hear what he's really saying, that even in the age of rockets and AI, the most advanced technology we still possess is empathy. Because empathy is what turns information into understanding. It's what turns noise into meaning. And it's what turns a restless night into a story worth telling. So the next time you see a message posted at 3 a.m., don't rush to interpret it. Just recognize it. Recognize it as a mirror, reflecting our shared condition, the need to express, to connect, to exist beyond the borders of sleep and solitude. Because maybe, in that strange stillness of night, we are all the same, searching for someone, somewhere, to understand what we mean. And that, my friends, is what makes us human, the ability to turn even our insomnia into art, our confusion into curiosity, and our messages into meaning. Thank you.